Hello everyone, this is Ashley Tucker from My Favorite Things, and today I have a birthday card to share with you using the Sweet Safari stamp set. My nephew has a birthday coming up, and I thought that the stamps in this set were perfect for creating a little kid's birthday card. I planned out the card in my sketchbook, so I knew all of the different images that I wanted to use. So I took those images and I put them in my MISTI tool, and I stamped them onto some Neenah Solar White cardstock with a Copic-friendly black ink. I'm going to move through the coloring process fairly quickly here. If you're curious about any of the colors that I used, I do have the marker caps off to the side so that you can see those colors. I used a very basic Copic coloring technique where I started with my lightest color, and then I added in my darker colors where I wanted shading, and then I blended out those darker colors by using the lighter color again. To get inspiration for the coloring on this card, I did go on Pinterest. I always find Pinterest to be a very helpful tool. So I just went on there and I searched for jungle birthday, and a bunch of birthday jungle themed invitations popped up, and they had different animals from the jungle on them, including lions and monkeys and giraffes. And I used the coloring for those animals as inspiration for my own coloring. Another thing that I did with the coloring on this that I find very helpful for whenever I'm coloring with Copic markers is I had a scrap piece of Neenah Solar White cardstock off to the side, and before I actually used any marker combinations on my images, I would test those markers together on that scrap piece of paper. And that just lets me know that they do work together and that they give me the color that I'm looking for. I don't actually own a lot of Copic markers, so sometimes when I put together color combinations for my images, I have to be a little bit creative and pick out some colors that you wouldn't necessarily think of. So for example, with the lion here, I didn't have the exact color that I really wanted for his fur, so I ended up taking two different colors and combining them together to get that color, and I made sure to test out those colors on my scrap piece of paper beforehand so I knew what they would look like, and once I mixed them together, I had the color I was looking for. Once the coloring was done, I took out the coordinating dies and lined them up with each of the images, taped them down with some post-it tape, and then I ran them through my die cutting machine. For the next part of the card, I have a small piece of sour apple cardstock, a larger panel of jelly bean green cardstock with a rectangle cut out of the center, a 5x7 piece of white cardstock with a larger rectangle cut out of the center, and I also have a 5x7 card base. And I'm going to use a piece of post-it tape to hold that card base shut so that I can work with it and not have it popping open all of the time. I layered all of these panels of cardstock on top of my card base in the way that I want them, and I held down that lighter green one so that it didn't move while I removed all of the other ones, and then I added little pen marks around it so that I know where to place it. I added some tape runner adhesive to this panel, and then using those pen marks as a guide, I placed that onto my card base. Next, I grabbed one of the two tree images that I colored in, and I added some dots of liquid adhesive to the back of it. I lined up all of my panels again where they're going to go, and I used them as a guide for placing that tree image right into that window, and then I moved all of the panels so that none of the liquid adhesive would get onto them. Just like I did with the smaller piece of green cardstock, I took the larger one and I figured out where I wanted it to go, and then I added some pen marks around the corners so that I could use those marks as a guide when I adhere the panel down. For this panel, I'm using foam tape to adhere it so that I have some interesting dimension. So now I have 2 layers on my card. This card is actually going to have 3 layers when I'm done with it, but before I add the 3rd layer, I need to put the images that are going on the 2nd layer onto the card so that they can be underneath that 3rd layer. For this kind of card, it's a really good idea to sketch it out beforehand so that you can plan all of this in advance. Using liquid adhesive, I added the second tree that I colored in as well as the giraffe onto that second layer. And while I was here, I also took the monkey and I added him onto the tree on the first layer of the card. Before placing the lion, I made sure to line up my white panel on top of everything so that I know where to place my lion so that he's completely showing once the third layer goes on. Alright, so for the third layer, I added foam tape to all of the empty spaces around the second layer so that it's all at the same level. And then I added foam tape behind my white panel of cardstock with the rectangle cut out of it, and I placed that down so that I have 3 different levels on the front of my card. This is a really fun and easy way to play with dimension on your cards, and you can switch out the shape of those windows for a different look. For example, you could do circular windows instead of the rectangles. For my sentiment, I picked out one of the stamps from the Giraffe Greetings stamp set. I stamped it with Versamark ink onto some dark green cardstock, and then I embossed it with white embossing powder. I cut that sentiment out using one of the Essential Stitched Sentiment Banner dies, and then I glued it onto my card with some liquid adhesive. Now, you could just leave the card like that and it would be done, but I always like to go a little bit further and add some pizzazz, so I picked out some embellishments in the colors green and yellow, and I arranged them around the card and then I adhered them down. I also thought it might be interesting to add some texture on the leaves of the trees, so I took a really dark blue-green marker and I added some dots towards the center of those leaves. This is a really subtle change, but I really like the way that it turned out. Finally, the last thing that I did for this card is I took my white gel pen and I added some highlights onto all of the colored-in images. And I always love doing this. I don't know what it is about adding these highlights, but I think that it makes the colored in images look so good. Thank you so much for joining me for today's card. I hope you liked today's design. It was really nice to take a break from Christmas cards and make a birthday card. I hope it gave you some inspiration. I hope you have a wonderful day today, and I'll see you next time.